Hi, and welcome to A Conversation with Carol. I want to ask you a question. What do you do when you have an expensive car loan, a high-maintenance girlfriend, and a sales job that just is not paying you enough? Do you closet yourself away in your bedroom over a wet, cold winter weekend and ask, why would somebody buy these products? Well, that's what James Yuille, today's guest, did back when office automation was in its infancy, when time clocks and public address systems were actually new technology. For those of you that have never heard of them, go and look in the History Museum. And then a formula started to appear, and he started to test it the following week, and guess what? It worked. And this is something that James has been asking a question and using that same formula ever since with devastating effectiveness. And James has used this formula to become the top salesperson in the company he was working at the time, and for over 20 years was the top salesperson in every company he worked for. And moreover, the sales teams he managed were highly successful as well. And James's private practice clients have increased their super contribution by $500 million and purchased a helicopter in the same year. They've grown companies from zero to multi-million worldwide corporations, and gone from needing to get jobs to just surviving to an asset-rich luxury lifestyle inside 2 years, and where someone's wife completely avoided having to go back to work for just an initial $2,000 investment and could care for the couple's 3 children, of which 2 have severe disabilities. And James calls this process TIPS. And during this live hangout with James here with me as a guest, he's going to share this amazingly simple and really successful process with you. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to say hi, James, and welcome.
Thank you, Carol, and good evening to you. Good morning from Australia.
I know, I forgot to tell people that. I'm here in the UK and it is late-ish evening, early night, 9:30 at night, and James has had to get out of bed really early because he's from Australia.
It's 6:30 in the morning here, so I'm speaking to you from tomorrow, Carol.
Exactly. It's Tuesday for you and Monday for me, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
So, James, tell us about TIPS. What is it?
Well, TIPS is an acronym, and for those watching, I'd like you to get a piece of paper. Can you see this, Carol?
I can.
I'd like you to put TIPS, T-I-P-S, down the side of the piece of paper like that, because that will help you make your notes as I'm speaking to you on this hangout with Carol. So TIPS came about, Carol, as you rightly said, because I was working for a company whose sales process had me walk through a presentation folder. So I had to turn the page to page to page to page to explain to these customers what these products were about. And I could see, you know, these were men as older than my father at the time. I was in my early 20s. And I could see their eyes glazing over with sheer boredom, thinking, when is this kid going to get the hell out of my office? And it just wasn't working. And as you said, I had some fairly expensive bills to pay, and I didn't know what to do. I was pitching. I was using. It was a numbers game. It was a matter of show the book to enough people, and some will buy. Well, I was in Adelaide at the time, and Adelaide's a relatively small city. And in that 12-month period, because this is obviously way, way, way before the internet, I actually cold called every business premises in Adelaide that year, at least all of those that were prospects. And I had to follow those calls up with a phone call to make an appointment with people. And I very quickly realized that I would run out of people to talk to by the end of the year. If I didn't actually make some sales in the process, I was going to be a year without sales, so to speak. So I sat down and I said to myself, why would people want to buy these products? What do they change? What does having these products change in these people's business? So I looked down at each one of these products and I thought, what is the problem that these products solve? So I analyzed very carefully the difference between not having the product and having the product would mean. And then I thought, okay, well, if you have the product, you have these benefits, and if you don't have the problem, if you don't have the product, you have the problem. Does that make sense to you?
That makes perfect sense to me.
So what a time clock meant, a Bundy clock meant, was that you had accurate records of the time of day that your staff clocked on in the morning, clocked off for lunch, and were at work. So those people who were trying to cheat the odd 5 or 10 minutes here and there by being consistently late and hoping they weren't being noticed were actually noticed. So it meant that you actually had people at their workplace at the time they were supposed to start work instead of 5 or 10 minutes later. It means that lunch breaks and tea breaks didn't have time cribbed. So I would call people up and I would say, you have a labour force in your factory, yes. Do you find it frustrating? Do you wonder how on earth you manage to find out exactly how many hours a day they work and when they start and when they don't, or when they stop? And they said, yeah, it's a constant problem. We know we're losing time, but we can't prove it. So I would say to them, if I could show you how to fix that, would you be interested? And they'd say, sure. So I'd come around and show them and say, this is what this does for you. And they'd go, fantastic, I'll have one. And it was really that simple. It turned what in many cases was a 20-minute flip chart presentation with glazed eyes and boredom into, I want that, how do I get it? So the acronym TIPS for this process came about because I thought at some stage I'm going to need to teach people how to do this, because I always had a vision of being in sales management and eventually training salespeople. So the way the acronym came about was that I thought, what are the key failing points? What are the key stumbling blocks in any sales process? And the first one was that when a person starts to simply pitch a product without establishing their own credibility or without identifying what potential problem the customer may have, they have a lack of trust. So the T in TIPS stands for trust. And the first thing you need to do is establish trust. Now, you and I have spoken to each other on several occasions, Carol, and this certainly isn't the first hangout we've done, and I'm sure it won't be the last. But you see, your audience is you sitting there, very, very smart, in nice clothes with a nice background and a nice business chair, and they see me standing here on a not so chilly Brisbane winter morning in a sweater and a shirt. But if I was standing here in a grubby, dirty T-shirt, with food stains on it, and you were sitting there in jeans and a sweatshirt, would that establish any credibility for us? Would that detract from our message? Now, I know there are people in the internet marketing world who say, no, it won't. And a lot of them try the hardest to be as grungy and as unpleasant looking as they possibly can, but in the business world today, it's still very important.
And I think that's a good comparison that you made there, James, because I'm all about being yourself. Now, when you said jeans, I had to laugh because nobody's got any idea what I am wearing on the and I quite often do wear jeans. Yeah, no, I mean, I am a jeans person, but I'm a smart jeans person, and the jacket and everything else makes a difference. And I think for a lot of people, because you said they're in the business world, and it is the business world that still has that perception, that still needs people to make that effort. I think if it's fitting. If I walk into a very informal environment to talk to people about an informal thing, and I walk in there in my smart suit, I could actually create the wrong trust, because they would think, oh, who's this posh person in their suit? So it is looking at the different environments. And when you said there, would that work in a business environment? No, a tatty T-shirt and egg down your top is not going to make a good impression at all.
Now, you see, we're dealing here, and there is a distinction, because the internet marketing world is relatively impersonal. If you go to an online jewelry shop, for instance, to buy a nice brooch or a necklace or earrings or something like that, you're actually simply looking at the product on the page, and you make your decision based on the fact that there's an emotional connection between you and the product and the price, and you put your card through the system, and you'll hope that within a few days that will arrive in your letterbox. And it really doesn't matter who the person behind this site is. But in the business world, we still have to make human connections. We still have to get face-to-face with people. And I think the It doesn't matter to me what the buyer is wearing. I mean, I did a call recently on a company where the owner of this company, and I was totally surprised, sat in his desk in black jeans and a black singlet, or vest as you'd call it. Now, this company is a quite sizable enterprise, and look, he's a lovely, lovely guy. I've done business with him for years. I've never actually met him until that day. And he looked like, I mean, he did. He was wearing a black singlet. And I was quite taken back with this, and I think it took me some time to, I don't know, recognize the colour of the man I was talking to, you know. So but trust is not just your clothing. It's the tone of your voice, the confidence of your voice. It's the quality of your business card. It's the quality of your website. It's the way that your receptionist answers the telephone and takes the message and puts the call through to you. Every touch point is a trust builder. I can remember some time ago teaching a young salesperson the ropes, and he went to walk into a client's office with folders and bits of loose paper and everything hanging out, and said, leave them in the car, leave them in the car. And he said, but what am I going to show the customer? I said, you're not going to show him anything. That's not what this call is about. This visit is to ask questions. This visit is to establish trust. This visit is to develop a connection that will lead to a relationship that will see exchange of thousands, tens of thousands of dollars over time. We don't want to go in and make this guy concerned that he's going to sit and have to look at bits of paper or PowerPoint presentations, heaven forbid. That's not the purpose. And I try to, when I visit clients, I try to go as light as I can. In fact, let me just get something here. I can't see it. I thought it was sitting on my desk. I just go in with a little A4 size notepad in a pleasant folder that contains my business cards, somewhere to put their business card, and a notepad so I can take a few notes. I don't carry any brochures, I don't carry any literature, I don't carry anything else, I just carry that. And I don't put it on his or her desk either, I just put it on my knee or on the floor beside me, because I don't want to encroach on their space, right? People are going to say, oh, but you've got to do this, you've got to do this. And can I tell you, I've been doing this for years, I've taught it for years, it works. So T is established trust. Because if you don't have trust, you can't carry out the second stage of this process. And the nice thing about this process is that each stage needs to be completed before the next stage can take place. And when I'm debriefing people about why they've lost a sale, and we did that call before about why you lost that sale, I go through this process and I find which one they missed. Because if they fail to establish trust, unless they've got something absolutely totally unique, they're the only vendor in the business, and you know the only people who can do that are the tax office and the post office, really. They don't need to establish trust, right? Some of them would do a lot better if they did.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if we trusted them, we would be a lot happier, and their lives would probably actually be a lot happier as well.
Well, yeah, neither of them do a great deal to ingratiate themselves to us, do they? Anyway, I can't tell you at what point the trust is established. You just have to feel it, and women are typically better at this. You feel a comfort point where, after you've had a little bit of small talk and you know you've introduced yourself and made a very small positioning statement, where the customer knows you're there for a reason. So whether they've called you or whether you've made a cold approach to them, the next thing that you need to do is start to investigate, which is what the I stands for. So this is forensic, and if you think back to the previous call, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, did I explain that concept of my father's, that prescription without diagnosis is malpractice?
I believe you did. It's such a long time since our call, but it rings a bell.
Shall I just refresh that for you then?
Yes, please do, please, because there'll be other people here that haven't actually seen the previous call yet as well.
Yep. My late father was a doctor, and he was a very good doctor, actually. And he taught me very early, when I asked him a question, what makes a good doctor? And he said that a doctor has to remember that prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. And what he meant by that was that it's professionally incompetent if a doctor prescribes medication or a course of treatment or surgery unless he or she is absolutely fully confident that they have identified the cause of the illness. I mean, if I were to walk into your surgery right now, you're the doctor, and I walk in and sit down, and you oh goodness gracious me, we've got to book you into hospital right now, you've got a major problem. And you call your receptionist and get her to book an ambulance and a theatre and a surgeon, and I'm sitting there thinking, what do you think's wrong with me? And I'm going to say, what do you think, what's wrong with me? And you're going to say, well, you've clearly got a very acute appendicitis and we need to get your appendix out. And I go, no, the only reason my stomach's uncomfortable is I had a burger with the works for lunch and the onion's repeating on me. I'm actually here because I've got an ingrowing toenail. And that's prescription without diagnosis. And what happens when a salesperson breaches trust and goes in and say, hello, Carol, good morning, thank you for letting me be here. Now let me show you my products, and runs through a flip chart and just pitches at you. They've broken trust and they're prescribing without diagnosis, right? Yeah. So the investigation process is about asking questions that revolve around the scenario that your product or service helps with. And in most people's eyes, there are two kinds of questions. There are open questions and there are closed questions. And people generally don't know how to use these. And when you use them correctly, you can get massive amounts of information in very short periods of time. So an open question is a question that essentially starts with who, what, where, when, why, and how. They're often known as the 6 wise men of selling. And when you ask a question with one of those 6 words at the beginning, it's almost impossible for the person you're asking to give you a yes or no, up, down, in, out answer. Okay? So the idea of an open question is that it engages conversation, it gets people talking. I mean, the only one that really doesn't stimulate conversation is how are you? And the answer to is either good, bad. And the definition of a snob is somebody who asks when how they are tells you. So, so this, and the other kind of question is what we call a closed question. A closed question is one that either has a yes, no answer. So, did you want that delivered this week? Is a yes, no. Will you be paying with a credit card or by cash? Is a closed question. So you need to make sure that when you're identifying the problem or looking for an opportunity that you can both appreciate, you need to use open questions to get the conversation flowing. But there's a third question that you can use, and very, very few people understand this one. I'll cover it briefly because I know we haven't got all day, and I do this in an all-day workshop. But the third kind of question is in what you'd call in NLP language is an embedded command. And the third kind of question is the one that actually takes the question mark away from the end of the sentence. So would you like me to tell you how to ask a question without a question mark?
Of course, I would like you to tell me that, and everybody else that is listening would like to know that.
Well, when you think about the way the English language is used, when you ask a question, there's typically an inflection at the end of the sentence. Would you agree with that? Have you thought about that? If I said to you, what's for lunch? There's an inflection. But when I put these words in front of that sentence, tell me about, or tell me who, what, when, why, or how, it's still a question, but it's actually an embedded command. It doesn't have a question mark at the end of it. So when you use that, and you have to use it sparingly, it has amazing effect. Now, this is nothing new. If you listen to or watch good TV interviewers, and Michael Parkinson is an absolute master at this, he uses tell me or tell me about. And what I would like people on this call to listen for and watch for is good journalists who use tell me who, what, where, why, how, or tell me about a scenario. Because you'll find that they actually get a lot more information from the customer than they would if they ask a closed question. And illustrate a point here in that some years ago I was given a referral to a company who were looking for some sales training. And I called this guy up and made a time to go and see him. I don't like using the word appointment because you make appointments with proctologists and lawyers and people who cause you pain. So I fixed the time to go and see this guy. And I sat in the meeting room in his office and waited for him to come in. And on the walls around the office, on all 4 walls, there were awards that he'd won, celebrating his gymnastics wins as a 9-year-old, celebrating his rugby wins at high school, you know, his degrees, his qualifications, his fastest growing company certificates, and all that stuff. Anyway, he came into the meeting room and he sat down, and I formally introduced myself to him, and I said, "So tell me about some of these awards. Which are you proudest of?" He talked for 20 minutes non-stop. And in that time, he told me pretty much everything I needed to know about his business. Without going into the details of the visit, in an hour and 15 minutes, I spoke for less than 10 minutes, and I walked out with an order for $12,000 of the training.
And I think that's a really good example that you've given there, because most people were probably waiting for you to tell them this example of where your first question was related to what you wanted to sell. But you actually created the trust by showing an interest in the person in the room before you even thought about what you were there for or what you were selling to him.
Yes, yes. And it was a genuine interest too. I mean, I've had people come and sell something to me, and they picked something up at my office and made a comment about it, and you can tell that there was absolutely no interest. It was simply a conversation breaker. I mean, you know, the stuff that I'm talking about here, you have to practice. It doesn't just come naturally. You can't just go out tomorrow and become a master of this. This is 40 years of experience here that I'm putting forwards to you in a, you know, an 1-hour conversation. So the objective here is that we have to identify the problem or problems, but not just that. We have to identify the degree of discomfort and the amount of pain and inconvenience having those problems actually is to that company or that business or that person. And it could be an individual that you're selling something to for the home, for instance. Pardon me. The other thing is, if you're investigating an opportunity with somebody, you have a joint venture idea with somebody that you want to share about, you're going to be asking them about how they see the business growth, what options they have, what plan B might be if what they're doing isn't as successful as they hoped, and engage find out even if they are interested in looking at other opportunities, because they may not be. And again, if you go in and say, "Hi, my name's James Yuille, I want to show you a fantastic business opportunity," and I start to sit there and pitch something to you about which you have no interest whatsoever because you're so totally and completely devoted and in love with what you do that anything else would be just incomprehensible, I'm going to damage my reputation completely, and I'm going to destroy any opportunity of a referral. Instead, if I were to sit and talk to him and ask him about his business and how it was going, and ask if he and his family were looking for other options in business, and if they were, to ask them if I could discuss an idea with them, and if they'd said no or not, I could say, look, I appreciate that, Carol, thank you. Would it be all right if I just gave you a couple of minutes of explanation about what this opportunity is about? Because you may just overhear casually at a barbecue or in a cafe somebody who's voicing some discontent, and you might think, you know what, James could help this person, I'll refer them.
And again,
and if they say, no, I'm not interested, you part friends. Thank you very much, I understand. If they say, yeah, okay, give me a 2-minute overview, and I tell them what it's about, and they say, well, you know, that might suit my sister. But you need to seek permission, you see.
Yeah, and I think that, again, that sort of, I'm sitting here listening to you and thinking, this is really, for the people that are listening, you know, this is about putting the attention on the person you're talking to and being there to actually help them, not being there to sell your stuff.
Oh, 100% right. 100% right. There's been a lot of discussion on forums recently that both you and I are engaged in about things like sales funnels and closing the sale. And to me, those things, those processes went out in the 80s. They're not modern processes at all. And it saddens me to think that people still think that you can close a sale. Now, you and I both know Chris Ball very well, and if Chris is listening to this at some stage, he will agree that several years ago he and I had a very significant argument, which I happened to win, which is rare with Chris. And that's not being disrespectful to our friend, but Chris is such a switched-on, bright guy. But he got the message from me that you can't close a sale. You can only open a relationship.
And I think that is, lots of people talk about relationship marketing, but they don't actually do it. They still focus on teaching people to convert and close sales. So I think that, I love the way you said there, you can't close a sale, you can only open a relationship. I think that was brilliant.
And as the trust in that relationship develops, there's going to be some time or other when you can see an opportunity where you can see a problem and say to a person, Carol, you know, I've been watching you struggling with this now for 3 months or 6 months. Can I take 5 minutes of your time and give you a suggestion about how you might get beyond that?
Yeah.
And you're going to say, okay, all right, spill the beans, Bunny, I'm interested, aren't you?
Exactly.
You know, it's like the dating process, and I know this has been said before, but you know, if you're a single guy and you walk up to every woman you see and say, will you sleep with me? And this has been done recently in a test by an American. He asked 100 women in a row if they'd sleep with him, and all 100 said no. It's a process of seduction, isn't it? I mean, you have to start with a coffee or a drink and a chat and a meal and a movie, and it's about trust.
Unless you get really, really drunk really, really quick. Then you might have a chance, but probably not.
Well, that happens in islands north of Australia and off the coast of Spain, doesn't it? We know that. So, I mean, you know, we have to think of this as, you know, it's a hare and a tortoise thing. Sometimes you can move very quickly, and I've had occasions where I have made a sale inside 5 minutes. And substantial sales, because I have asked the right question when I've approached the customer. I've gone into his or her office as a welcome guest because they're keen to hear how I'm going to take this pain away. And I've said to them, and I'm you know, role-playing this, Carol, from what you tell me on the phone, you've got this problem. And this is what happens because of that, and you're stuck and frustrated. Have I read that right? And you go, yes, you have. And I said, all right, here's how we're going to take it away. This is what we need to do. And this is the P step of tips. This is propose an appropriate solution. Now, if you can't fix the problem, don't try.
And again, that is so important. I like the way you put a lot of emphasis on appropriate solution, because there are a lot of people out there who will still propose their solution because it's the best thing since sliced bread, whereas actually, if you can't, like you say, don't offer a solution. If you're going to, make sure it's appropriate, because that will actually break the trust. If you just try and sell them anything that you think, well, it sort of will do the job, but it's not really right, but we'll get their money from them, you're losing that long term, aren't you?
In many ways, because you destroy the trust of that person, you destroy the confidence of your brand, and you may have another solution in another pocket that would fix another problem, but he's never going to listen to you again. I mean, if I go back to my father's scenario, it's like prescribing eye wash for an ingrowing toenail.
Yeah.
And it's just inappropriate. So you have to make sure that your questioning is not invasive, but it's deep enough that you can truly identify that you can fix the problem.
Yeah.
So proposing the appropriate solution, you cannot propose a solution until you are fully aware of the problem. So the way that I do that, the way that I teach that, is to do a quick summary, as I suggested before, where we say, Carol, let me see if I've read this right. And I'm very visual, so you know those kinesthetic people out there are going to say, James, where's the touchy-feely stuff? And I can do that in the right environment. I will, but my natural modality is visual. So I think I understand what you're saying. Can I read that back to you? You know, covers most of the modalities. So use whatever phraseology is appropriate for the person. What you're telling me is that this and this and this and this. And that if you leave that, if you don't sort that, you're going to have staff turnover, you're going to have this or whatever it is, whatever it is. Have I got that? Yes. Okay. So the way I bring in my solution is, here's what I suggest we do.
Cool. I like that, because that's inviting them. It's not saying here's what you must do, which could instantly create a barrier. It's just saying to them, I'm going to suggest something, but it's going to be your choice.
Yes, because to me, and I'm probably not physically, but mentally, I want to be sitting on the same side of the desk as the prospect, as the customer, because I want them to understand that I'm looking at the problem from their eyes as well. So I'm sitting beside them with a solution. And, you know, this is metaphoric, please. I want to be able to put my arm around them and say, there, it's okay, you know, we'll sort this out together, calm down. You see? So I call it selling from the same side of the desk.
Yeah, I like that, because it gives that warm feeling, and that feeling that you're there to help them. You're not there to make them do something.
Yeah, exactly. Because it has to be their idea. So, you know, if I say, here's what I think we should do, and then I say, ba, 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 right? Now, they're going to do one of two things. They're either going to say, that sounds excellent to me. Now, you see, if you do this, people in selling have this thing about getting objections and answering objections. I don't get objections. I just don't. And when you do this one, you don't get objections. Because what's going to happen is that the person is going to say, yeah, that's not bad. What about this and this? And I say, sure, that we can do that as well. How do you think they'd dovetail in, or whatever it may be? Because, you know, if he comes up with something or she comes up with something that's relevant and additional, yes, that's fine. Let's put that in. That's a great idea. You know, most of the time, the kind of questions that they're going to ask you are implementation questions. Right? Now, at this stage, you notice, by the way, we haven't talked anything about price.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
I haven't mentioned fee or price at all, because invariably they're going to say, what's this going to cost me? Right? And I'm going to say, look, I need to do some serious calculations on this to give you an accurate figure. But ballpark, we're talking between $10,000 and $12,000. And then before they can say anything, I'll just say, how does that sit with you?
Yeah.
And they're going to say, you know, it's reasonable, it's unreasonable, whatever, right? But you see, already I've painted the price of not fixing it, because I've identified with them what the downside risk is. Because I've asked them, you know, how much is this costing you? You know, how much lost time? How many lost sales? How much lost this? What's the end risk? And if the end risk is, look, staff turnover is going to increase. You know, we have a problem with staff turnover at the moment. And I'm going to say, well, you know, surely, how much does it cost you every time somebody leaves? And you agree to a figure that's $20,000 or $30,000, or pounds, or euros, or rand, or whatever the currency is. And that's for you, Greg, if you're listening, by the way. I know that there are some South Africans here. And he's already aware that not fixing his problem is costing him a certain amount of money. So if I say it's going to cost $12,000, he's already thinking, huh, that's cheap.
Yeah.
And he says, when I say how does
pre-work, isn't it? Because you've had the conversation and built the trust, and because you've really investigated the problem, and they've had time during that conversation to really focus on what it's costing them and the pain that they're having. So when you've now given the suggestion and the ballpark figure, that is much lighter for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, you know, so I say, how does that sit with you? And, you know, invariably I'm going to get, oh yeah, that's okay, that's reasonable, we can cover that. We then move on to stage 4. Now, while I say I don't believe that there's a closing technique you can use, what I mean by that is that the things like the circle technique, the pen circling technique, the Ben Franklin T-bar close, the alternate choice close, the triplicate choice for money or product, they don't work. They're manipulative. You've heard all these things from the, you know, the 80s from Ziegler and Hopkins and all those people who commanded.
I probably heard them all. I just didn't know that they all had names.
I had a joke with a guy once. The guy was a professional purchasing officer for Honeywell that I was selling to, and he kept coming up with objections. I mean, he knew that I was a competent salesman, and he kept coming up with objections. And I said to this guy, "Can we take your time out here for a minute?" And he said, "Sure, why?" I said, "Well, I know more answers to objections than you know objections, so let's stop this game." You know, and I said it with a joke and a smile, and we became really good mates as a result of that. So, you know, this whole objection thing, it's a furphy, right? It's a phrase coined by con men to sell products and information to amateurs who don't know any better, because they're making an assumption that your process generates objections, and it shouldn't. Okay.
Yeah, and that's something really, as you said that, it's like, gosh, yeah, because you do hear so many people saying you have to know the objections, you have to know the answers to the objections, and that is assuming that what you're coming in with them at and the way you're talking to them, there are going to be objections. I mean, for me, yeah. I don't actually see anything as an objection. I tend to see, and especially this price one, because most people talk about price objections, or a lot of people do. And for me, it's, well, if somebody says to me, I don't have the money, now sometimes that can be an excuse if they are scared, but a lot of the time, it's actually true. Right now, I don't have the money, but I'd love to work with you. So you just say to them, okay, fine. And if you've got something you can offer them that they can afford, offer them that, and say, look, well, we can't do that, but we can help you with this. And if not, get in touch with them again later.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, in the corporate world, there is often an occasion where the money may not be budgeted for, or the department manager that you're talking to needs some higher authority approval. But you see, you should already know whether the person that you're speaking to has got the authority to spend that money.
Yeah.
Okay? And you can't get a decision from somebody who hasn't got the authority to make one. So instead of trying to close that person, what you have to do is make them an advocate. So you have to give them so much ammunition that when they take your proposal outline, whatever rebuttal they get to it, they have an answer for. And can I give an example of this? Because this is a really, really good example. Some years ago, I was running a business selling IT training to schools. And we were teaching teachers how to use computers in the classrooms. And there was a particular Catholic boys' school in Brisbane where I was working very closely with the head of IT. And he had me put a proposal forward for providing training material to the teaching staff and to run professional development classes. Now, the proposal was in 2 separate components. One was for the actual material that I was selling them a license to use, and the other one was for one of my trainers' times to go into the school and run classes. So the proposal went to the school management team, and I fully expected on this particular Wednesday morning to get a phone call from the guy at the school saying, look, it's all good to go, James, let's get on with it. I did get a phone call, but it wasn't the one I expected. He said, look, he said the management committee actually preferred another solution to yours. And I said, so tell me what it offered that mine didn't. And he said, well, theirs was more product-based because the management committee would prefer that we ran the training sessions in-house. And what these people have offered to do is come and run a train-the-trainer program for a small group of staff so that they can take your material and teach it. And I said, okay, well, if I repackaged mine in the same way, which would you prefer to buy? And he said, yours, because he said, I think you're far better positioned and your material is better positioned than the other parties. So I simply rewrote the proposal. I didn't change the price. I just changed the balance. Now, that proposal was worth $15,000. We made twice as much money on the re-engineered proposal as we would have done on the first one because the labour time was reduced.
Yeah. And that's just, again, that's listening, isn't it? And actually not being so fixed on, but I want that sale like that, and they come back and they say, well, we've chosen someone else, so you go, ah, and you disappear. You actually go back to them and find out what it is that's made the difference, and if you can actually offer that or more, then you tell them that.
Yes. And there have been other occasions where somebody said to me, you know, that's a little bit more than I'd planned. It's what I want, but it's more than I'd planned. Now, I don't go into panic mode and say, well, I'll give you 20% off. I simply say, well, that's fine. What would you like me not to do?
Yeah. And that's
you know,
what, it's again,
like,
don't discount instantly. Stay where you are and take things away, which is a completely different feeling to telling them you'll make it cheaper.
Yes. And on several occasions I've had people say, well, I want all of it. I say, well, okay, well, that's the price. See, the negotiation then becomes about the terms.
Yeah.
Because I can say to them, look, we can break it down into chunks and deliver it more slowly than we otherwise would have done. Or are you able to pay cash up front? Because if you do, we have a 5% discount offer for anybody who, and I do this in my business. If somebody wants to pay me for a project up front, I take 5% clean off the top. Because it means I don't have any more invoicing, I don't have to chase them for money. You know, it's clean and done and dusted, and it also shows a fairly major commitment from their part when they pay up front. But we can negotiate the terms, so it might be that we'll spread the payments over 6 months instead of 3 or 4. You see, they've agreed they want it. There's no issue that they want it. It's just how are they going to pay for it that's the issue. And this brings me into point 4, because I was talking about the close. Now, to me, I mean, things around closing the sale are like washing my mouth out with carbolic soap, and it's liquid poison as far as I'm concerned. But I've proven, and I'm totally satisfied with this, that if you have the first 3 points of this process done correctly, and that you've got obviously and some form of acknowledgement from your customer that the fee or price that you're wanting for your solution is acceptable, the only way to take this forward is say, so when did you want to get this started?
Yeah.
Because as soon as they said as soon as possible, the deal's done.
Exactly.
It's all over.
Carry on, sorry.
So S stands for set a timeline.
Cool.
Or establish a sense of urgency. Okay? So if I go back to the example where I spoke for less than 10 minutes in that hour and a quarter conversation with the guy who wanted training, I'll go back to the time, and it was late January, early February when I spoke to him. And he said to me, James, all this is fantastic. I'm moving house, I've got this happening, I've got that happening in my life, my wife's pregnant, I think we'll implement this in June. And I had to leave for another appointment. I had a training session to run somewhere and 10 people waiting for me. So I said to this guy, listen, I have to leave. I said, but before I go, let me ask you this question. How much is it going to cost you in lost sales by waiting 5 months to put this into practice? And with that, I shook his hand and walked out the door. Now, I got back quite late that evening. Following morning, logged into my email after breakfast. There's an email from this guy, and it was timed 5 minutes after I left. Said, money's good, date is, send invoice. Cool. He booked a training room for the following week.
Wow.
So I discussed with him a staggered invoice plan. I sent him the invoice with the payment terms. He paid the whole lot that afternoon. Because I'd left him with that thought, what's the pain? How much is the pain going to be if you don't deal with this today? Yeah. And he became a really, really good client. And every time he put a new salesman in his business, he sent him to me to train. And he actually hired a guy once. This is a really interesting story. He hired a guy because on his resume, he had written that he'd done my sales training course. And he rang me up and said, do you know this guy? And I said, yeah, I do, actually. He's a really good salesman. And he said, I'm going to hire him. I said, have you met him yet? He said, no. I said, well, why are you going to hire him? He said, because he's done your course and I have to teach him. Now, this guy went to work for this guy. He was in HR. He was in recruitment, right? Now, he hired this guy. His name was John. He hired John. John was highly successful for him. John went on to start his own temporary staff hire company. And I've lost touch with him. It's probably 10 years since I last seen John. He rang me recently. He said, James, I just want to let you know that I've sold my business and I'm retiring. Thank you. I said, why thank you? He said, because you taught me how to sell. And he said, that gave me the confidence to create my own business. He sold it to one of the largest companies in the industry for a very significant amount of money.
Awesome.
And he and his wife are retiring, and he's quite a bit younger than I am. That was a pretty good outcome, you know?
Yeah, that's not bad at all. Now, I've got a question for you.
Go ahead, Carol.
You've gone through the tips, but one of the questions that's come up is how much time should somebody spend before they take the first step? So they're going, because we've talked about they go and meet somebody and they've got to establish the trust before they move on to the next steps. But how much pre-information or pre-research or what should people do before they actually get to that first step? Is there anything, or do they just go in there?
Historically, I've done very little because prior to the internet, it was actually very hard to find out about your customer's business. But today, I would have a look at their website and get some idea of the size of the company, the number of offices, the number of staff, the kind of people that they deal with. But often that isn't necessary. And you know, again, it's kind of like the medical scenario. If the doctor has a preconceived idea of what's wrong with you, they're going to misdiagnose. I'd prefer to go in with a clean slate. I do remarkably little research about the people I'm going to see, and that's really truthful.
So,
because,
sorry, carry on.
If they come to me and say, look, I'm interested in something you're selling, my initial question to them, and this is something perhaps I should have dropped in earlier on, my initial question is, what prompts you to ask about this?
Yeah.
Or why are you interested in?
So that already gives you that.
I'll tell you.
Yeah, exactly. But what about people that are sitting and they're thinking, but what if people don't come to me and I'm looking for people that I can go to have that initial meeting? Yeah. What do I do there?
Well, if you've taken the time to ask yourself the question, what problem do I solve and who has the problem? Because it's whenever somebody comes to me looking for some help to market their business or market their product, I ask them a triple-barrel question. And that triple-barrel question is, what problem do you solve, who has the problem, and can they afford your solution?
Yeah, and again, by doing that, those 3 questions is basically helping you to go and have the initial conversation and build the trust with the people that are going to buy your solution anyway.
Exactly. So you identify a type of business or a size of business or a geographic location of business or an age group of business owner, and you can call them up and say, hey, Carol, look, my name's James Yuille. I know you don't know me, but I'm in the business of helping people migrate their business to live and work in other countries. Now, I'm not sure if that's anything that you thought about, but if you have, I'd love some time with you to discuss how I might be able to help that, make that easier for you. Now, would you say, come and talk to me, or would you say politely bugger off? What would you do?
It depends what I'm looking for, and if that is what I'm looking for, then because of the way you've put it to me, I would most likely say, come and talk to me.
So, okay, so if you were selling, let's say you're selling exit planning for business owners, and you identify an industry type, or you identify that people typically over the age of 50 don't have a proper exit plan for the business. Okay? So I might call you up and let's just role play this scenario with you. I ring up and say, Carol, my name's James Yuille, and I'm in the business of helping people structure their exit plans for the business so that when it's time to hang up the boots and retire, they can actually sell their business profitably and have some additional money for the superannuation and into retirement than they might do if they don't plan it beforehand. Tell me, have you got any thoughts of maybe selling your business or retiring in the next 5 to 10 years?
I would certainly like to retire in the next 10 years, yeah, so yeah, I hadn't actually thought about what I would do though.
Okay, part of what we do is help people focus on a plan for that exit, however far into the future it may be. Would you be okay if I invited myself over for a coffee and maybe spend 15 or 20 minutes with you, just to sort of set the scene to see if there's something that we might be able to help you with?
Yeah, sounds good to me. When would you like to do it?
Well, you see, now I'm a welcome guest when I come, aren't I?
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, move forward 2 or 3 days or a week or whenever until I'm sitting down. I'm going to say, Carol, thanks for asking me over this morning. Now, I'm really curious. I'm really curious. Since I asked you the question about retiring for your business, what thoughts have been going through your mind about that?
That is a good question. I'm supposed to be role-playing and I can't instantly think of what thoughts have been going through my head, apart from things like, well, I hadn't actually thought about this, and oh my goodness, I need to do something because I do want to retire, but I haven't worked out how I'm going to do that.
So, can you see now we have a conversation going?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I'm just in dialogue with you about how and what your thoughts about retirement are. So, you know, the next question I'm going to ask is, let's roll the camera forward 10 years, Carol, and you've just handed the keys of the business over to the person who's bought it. What are you going to do now?
I'm going to have a nice life. I'm going to travel to start with.
Yeah. So can you see now we're already painting the future?
Yep.
And I'm going to say, if you keep on running your business exactly the way you do, is anyone seriously going to buy it?
And that could be a yes or it could be a no, depending on the actual business.
Yeah. So if you want to do this in 10 years' time and you actually want to leave this business with some capital from a sale, we need to look at how you structure the business, about how you set it up, about the systems and the processes that you employ and engage to make that happen. Now, for any business coaches watching, I've just made you $1 million.
Yeah.
That's what a business coach should be doing.
Yeah.
But they don't. See, fact of life. So does that answer those questions, Carol?
Yeah, I think it does. And what I'm going to ask you to do now, just go through again. I know everybody wrote down tips on their piece of paper to begin with, and hopefully have been writing lots of notes, and people that are watching the recording that you're doing the same. But just recap on those steps for people.
Absolutely will. The acronym is TIPS. It stands for establish trust, identify a problem or opportunity. I think the next one is possibly the most important. It's propose an appropriate solution. Because if you do that, you're going to eliminate objections and you should get a fairly immediate buy-in. Whether it's yes, we'll buy it, or it has to move up the management line in order to get bought. And then the S stands for set a timeline or establish a sense of urgency. So the questions around that are, when did you want to do this? Or what happens if you don't?
Brilliant stuff.
And when it doesn't work, you need to go back and see which point you miss, and you'll find it, because there will be one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what happens if it doesn't work, but you've already answered that question before I asked it, which is brilliant. Now, what if somebody wants to go deeper into this and they actually want to learn more? Do you have a product? Do you train? How do people get hold of you to find out more?
Well, the answer to the first two questions is yes. We have products, we have books, training manuals. We're producing a video series at the moment with this tip stuff explained in a slightly different format to this. I do consultancy work. I work with people on engineering their sales pipeline to make sure that all of these points are covered, that the marketing message is right, and everything's synchronous from end to end. The best website for people to contact through me is topsalesinternational.com, and there's a contact form on there that they can, and my contact details are on there. The easiest way to get me is email, because I'm not always here to answer the telephone. So topsalesinternational.com. And the email address there is tsi@topsalesinternational.com.
tsi@topsalesinternational.com. I was just typing that as you were saying it. What I've done is I've typed that in for people into the event page, into the comments, so that everybody can see it there.
Oh, that's very nice of you, Carol. Thank you.
No, it's me that needs to say thank you to you for spending your time with us, for getting up at probably 6 o'clock in the morning to be live on here with me at 6:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, when I'm still Monday here in the UK, and share so many really great tips and share it in a way that is really easy to follow with, because sometimes I find that people explain sales and marketing and all of this other stuff, and they talk a lot of techie jargony stuff that people go away thinking, I didn't really understand any of that. So I think it was really nice the way you were really clear with it, and you went through it, and gave examples along the way as well for people to really get what you were sharing.
Thank you. The feedback that I constantly get from people is that I make complex topics simple.
Yeah.
Because this really is simple. It's a simple process. It's not easy, but I don't see why things need to be made overly complex. You know, I guess that people who make things overly complex are trying to create dependency. And I don't want to create dependency. I want to create interdependency. Right?
Yeah.
Or independency, where I can teach people and they can move on. I think I mentioned you, did I mention to you about the guy who was the swimming pool builder who approached me about 2 years ago for some help with his business? Was just yesterday, there was a really interesting follow-on to that. Did I share you that story?
I think you've shared it with me. I think we shared it on the last call, but I can't remember exactly. Just very briefly tell people the story and then give us the update.
I was invited to go and do a talk about using AdWords to the members of a swimming pool association here in Brisbane. And a few weeks after that talk, the guy, and he won't mind me mentioning his name, so I'll mention him. His name was Brian Noble, and Brian rang me up and said, look, I've got some problems, can you come around and have a chat with me? His business was in serious trouble. He's a very competent fully licensed builder, but he just didn't have enough work to keep his business going. And he was concerned that he'd have to go back to work and that his wife would have to go back to work. And by back to work, it means working as a builder for another builder. So I said to him, look, are you prepared to take a risk and try this? And he said, look, we've got nothing to use, yes. So I put together an AdWords campaign for him, which generated leads to his website. We eventually rebuilt that website because it really wasn't good enough. But I did some sales training with him, and I repositioned him. And he went from losing sales of $25,000, which is sort of the value of a base pool, to winning jobs of $100,000 and $200,000 without advertising. He hasn't advertised now for close to 18 months. I mentioned him in a conversation with a client yesterday, and I thought, I haven't spoken to him for ages. I said his name was Brian Noble. I'm sorry, it isn't. It's Mick Noble. And I rang Mick yesterday just out of the blue and called him. He just got home, and I said, how's things? He said, oh, fantastic. He said, I've got a really good job on the way at the moment. He said, I'm doing a house reno and building the guy's swimming pool. I said, oh, how much is it worth? He said, oh, the pool's not much. It's about 100 grand. And I'm going, not much, 100 grand. And he said, yeah, and the house reno's worth 900. And I said, I was pretty astounded, and I said, Mick, 2 years ago when I first met you, did you ever in your wildest dreams imagine you'd ever be doing jobs like that? He said, no, I didn't. He said, I was resigned to going back to work, and so was my wife. And I'm so grateful that she hasn't had to, because we have 2 autistic children, and she can pay them the time and attention that they need.
That is awesome.
And I was blown away that he was doing, and do you know how he got the job? He was doing a pool in the street that this other guy lives in, and it was an over-the-fence conversation. Who's building your pool? Is he any good?
Yeah.
It was a referral for $1 million sale.
Awesome. And again, that's because of trust and building those relationships, isn't that?
Exactly. And the guy who's doing this work for is a really heavyweight corporate executive. I mean, a seriously heavyweight guy. And obviously all his friends are seriously heavyweight. I mean, this guy's got $1 million to spend renovating his house. He knows other people who've got $1 million to spend.
Yeah.
And Nick doesn't advertise. That's all.
Awesome. That is such a brilliant story to sort of finish our hangout on, because it's like, wow, what a brilliant thing that somebody who just a couple of years ago was about ready to go down the pan and go back to work, and now they're just flying and everything is great. I think that's an awesome way to sort of end. So I want to say a really big thank you to you, James, for coming on and sharing so many great tips with everybody and taking them through that process. If you've got any one thing that you would sort of, like one sentence or tip that you'd like to leave people with.
Never be frightened of asking one more question in the investigation process, because it might be the one that uncovers the diamonds. Love
it. Excellent. So thank you so much for coming on and for getting up early to come and be my guest, James. And I know that we'll probably have some more hangouts in the future.
I look forward to doing that with you, Carol. It's always fun.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so everybody, thank you for watching. If you've got any questions, and if you happen to be coming back and you're watching the recording and we're not here live, still feel free to put questions into the event page, into the comments, because I always circle back to previous events and check up if people have been there and asked any questions, and if there are, then I will come back to you as well. And hopefully we'll see you soon on another conversation with Carol.